What's going on, everybody? Gary B. Jr. here, and I want to talk to you a little bit about getting a camera for your ministry or even for events. Because when you're filming like a church service or a ministry meeting or something like that, it's just like shooting any other event in terms of the technology needed. And so I want to talk to you about what do you really need? Because popular opinion will tell you that you're going to need the latest and greatest mirrorless camera with the best lenses, A, B, C, and D, yada, yada, yada. And the truth of the matter is, that's not true. Um, I am one that I've shot events, I've worked with ministries, and I've used cameras. I've used my own cameras. I've recommended cameras for them to use as a media consultant. And the fact of the matter is, there's some very basic things that you will make sure you need for any event slash ministry meeting shooting in your camera. So you need some very basic things. One of those main things is you're going to need a full size HDMI or SDI output. All right. Now, this is important because you need to connect, typically for an event or church meeting, you're going to need to connect your camera to some type of switcher. All right. Because most often than not, you're using more than one camera. And so out the gate, my number one recommendation is going to be full size HDMI. And those are more budget cameras. And I say budget in terms of they're not super expensive. Even brand new, they're less expensive than cameras that need or have SDI. SDI is ideal. It's great, especially if you got to run a cable for a long distance. But at the very least, you need to have a full size HDMI. All right. This is for a number of reasons. One of those reasons being reliability. Okay. If you don't have a full size HDMI, I promise you the switcher that you're using doesn't have a mini HDMI or a micro HDMI. You're going to have to convert that cable to be full size HDMI just for your switcher. And if you add in an adapter, you're adding room for failure. You're adding a point of failure in your process that you don't need. All right. So, number one, get a full size HDMI. All right. And I'm just here talking. So, I'm not going to give you a list and count them out and do all that. But I will say that is at the top of my list when it comes to getting a camera for an event. Now, what that means is you're not going to be able to get half of the mirrorless cameras that are out on the market and be able to reliably use the HDMI port because most of them, even the ones that are talked about the most, have a mini or micro HDMI output, which is sad to say, but it's the truth. So this brings us to the next point. You need to have a camera that does not have a recording limit. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to be recording on your cameras for your events all the time because a lot of times you may be recording directly to a computer or to the switcher, which has an SSD drive or something like that connected to it to record directly to. I love that idea. However, there are going to be times where you're going to need to record directly to your camera, right? If there's a need for a backup, I always recommend if you're going to be recording to a switcher or to your computer, I always recommend an actual backup that's recording directly to the camera, and then you can just delete the file if you know that your switcher recorded it on the SSD. Your computer recorded it. You don't need to keep that large file because most of the time the camera's files are going to be a little bit larger than what you'll find on an ATEM switcher, for example, or even on your computer, depending on how you record. Right now, you might record on OBS, and so OBS, you can set the file sizes to be a lot smaller than what you would see typically on a computer. All right, and so that's my next tip is making sure it does not have a recording limit. And this again narrows out quite a few cameras that are mirrorless cameras, but it opens the door to understand that you could get a really good quality camcorder. You can get a PTZ camera, and each of those will have each of these requirements met. Even film cameras obviously would have that requirement met because there aren't any film cameras that'll have that recording limit for one, and then most all, if not all of them, have a full-size HDMI and or SDI. Some of them have both. With that being said, we're still talking about doing this on a reasonable budget. And so, no matter what your budget is, the goal is to always be below the budget when it comes to the equipment and then above the mark when it comes to your knowledge of how to use that equipment. All right. Because getting brand new and awesome equipment means nothing if your knowledge is way down here of how to use that equipment. So, my thought process is I want to have more knowledge than I do in terms of the level of my equipment. I want to actually have a greater understanding of how to make the best shot, right? And so if you start thinking about camcorders or PTZ cameras, the next thing that comes to mind is you got to understand or have some um, ability to use lighting. All right. And I say that because mirrorless cameras, the big advantage to me with them is that they work really well in low light. Camcorders, I would say not so much because the sensors are so much smaller. And the same way with PTZ cameras, not so much because the sensor is just so much smaller. And I'm saying smaller, even smaller than it's smaller than a micro four thirds camera, which I actually use. I actually use micro four thirds cameras, and compared to camcorders and even most PTZ cameras I've seen, a micro four thirds camera does excellent in low light, right? Now, that doesn't mean that a full frame camera wouldn't be even better, because it would be even better in low light. Now, low light is not something that typically means that you're just shooting and the lights are dark and dim. It usually has to do with it's the way and the form of the feel that you want to have for your shot. And this is usually when you're doing more commercial work or cinematic work where you're shooting films, short films, and things like that. And so low light in most ministries usually just has to do with the fact that the lights aren't very bright, right? You turn on the lights and they're not very bright to the camera's eye, but for a natural human eye, it looks just fine, right? And so lighting has to do with maybe adding some lights to the scene, and or figuring out a way to make the most of where you position the speaker, where the lights are already positioned in the room, right? And this can be hard for a lot of older churches and ministries. For events, typically, if you're doing a big event, you're going to probably have some budget or something like that for lighting. And if you don't, you need to figure out a way to get some good lighting there, because that's going to be a challenge in a lot of these hotels and large arenas and venues and things like that that don't have lighting built in. It could be a challenge, right? So I'm saying all that to say that if you don't have good lighting, which if you got a low budget, it's not likely that you do, then you might need to go the route of a mirrorless camera just so you can have a better picture quality with the lighting that you have. Does that make sense? And so for that, now we're going back into the mirrorless world. And so now we got to get a camera that has full size HDMI. We got to get a camera that has no recording limit. And this is going to be the challenge, because a lot of times we think it's most important to get a camera that has um, great autofocus for these events and things like that. And from my own experience, using a GH5 and using a GH6, autofocus is not the biggest problem that I have. The biggest problem I've had is lighting, maybe, or sound, which we'll talk about here in a second as well. But if you're trying to use a camera that meets those requirements and it ends up being something that doesn't have great autofocus, you should not be afraid to use that camera, because 9 times out of 10, if you're shooting an event, you're going to be at the camera itself. And so you literally can manually focus your lens however you need to make sure you keep up with the person that's on the stage or the group that's on the stage. And most often than not, you're going to be so far from the stage that you can manually focus, usually by touching on the back of the screen and focus on the person's face or whatever it is, and you don't have to move your focus again, right? So manual focus is usually best when it comes to events, from my own experience, because autofocus gives room for it to jump around and maybe jump to someone else's face and be inconsistent. If I wanted to move focus, I want to manually do it and have full control over it. So autofocus is not a prerequisite if you're solely using this camera for shooting events at a venue like a ministry meeting and or a conference or something along those lines, because people don't usually go back and forth away from the camera in those events. They may go side to side, but if you go side to side, you'll learn or understand, if you know anything about cameras or learning about cameras, your focal plane is literally going this way. It's going horizontal. And so if the person is standing at a pulpit or a podium and they move to their side, to the side, that doesn't take them out of focus. It takes them out of focus if they get closer or further from your lens. All right. And that's the thing that we got to understand. And most of the times in events, you can focus on the podium, the person at the podium, have someone stand in and you can get the focus. And then everybody's coming to the same spot if there's multiple people up, and they'll be in focus because they're going to the same spot. So you're literally focusing on an area and not on an actual face. And you don't have to worry about them being in or out of focus because it's set. It's on manual and it's not going to move. So that would be my recommendations. The next thing has to do with audio. Now, cameras and audio, a lot of times we don't think about the audio with our camera because we think, oh, I've got a sound system, so I'm not that worried about it. But I want to encourage you to consider something from my own experience, yet again, working with ministries, working and doing recording events and things like that. One of the best things you can do is have your audio come into your switcher, right? If you got an ATEM switcher, there's a lot of other switchers out there. I'm gonna reference an ATEM because that's what I've used the most. But if you've got an ATEM switcher that is getting your HDMI feed or your SDI feed from your camera, one of the best things you can do is have the audio directly connected to that same camera that your picture's coming from. And when it comes into the switcher, it's automatically in sync. All right. Now, I'm not saying there's not ways around working around this or whatnot, but the simplest process is to have good audio going directly into your camera. So what does that mean? How do we get good audio? Well, you need to have a camera that has, I should say, good preamps built into it. And this is something that you can look at some reviews on YouTube and things like that, and you can get an idea, generally speaking, about the preamps in most cameras. And I can tell you from a general perspective, Canon cameras that are not their cinema line usually are not known for having good preamps. And I know from my experience, I've used some older Canon cameras, and the preamps aren't that great. And when I say preamps, meaning they're clean and they're loud, okay? Clean and loud. My experience with Canon was that they were low. Now, it doesn't mean they were noisy, but I introduced noise because they were so low. I had to turn up my microphone so loud or my sound system so loud that it just introduced more noise. Okay, so for me, clean and loud is best because then you can turn your system down and get the signal to your camera, and your camera is going to be able to read that cleanly without you having to boost it up so much and introduce more noise into your particular audio source that you're using. Now, the best audio source from experience, yet again, is an XLR port. Okay, so using an XLR directly into your camera from a soundboard is going to be the best way, or directly from a microphone. I've got a microphone directly connected to an XLR port on my GH6. Now, how did I do that? A lot of newer cameras, and this GH6 is not very new, and relatively speaking, I think it came out in 2022 or 2023, maybe 2022, I believe. I don't think it's 2023, but maybe. They will have some type of adapter. Okay, mirrorless cameras, I don't think any mirrorless camera has a built-in XLR port unless you're talking about black magic cameras, and those are cinema cameras. They're mirrorless, but they're more of a cinema camera. When I talk about mirrorless, I'm literally talking about cameras that are usually the hybrid photo video cameras are generally what that's usually recognized as. And so when you think about those, Sony has some adapters that are on their grips that they sell with their cameras that you can plug an XLR port into. A lot of camcorders have built-in XLR ports available for them as well, and usually it's going to be found like in some type of handle or something like that. And I believe, I'm trying to think. I know Panasonic sells an adapter because I've got one. They've got a couple of different versions of theirs, a version 1 and a version 2. Sony has it. I don't know that Nikon creates one, and I don't know about Canon having anything like that outside of it being built in to their cinema cameras. Now, going back, we're talking about having an efficient event recording. And so using an XLR cable directly to your camera is not a requirement, but it definitely is more efficient because even if you're not going to be recording to a switcher, you can have your audio connected directly to your camera and it'll be clean and ready to work with directly out of camera when you put the SD card in your computer, right? If you're doing it from a switcher, the switcher may have a microphone input, but they usually are not going to be XLR inputs either. So it's going to be some type of adapter you're going to need to get the audio directly from a soundboard, or you're going to have to get this unbalanced line, a quarter-inch line or something like that that's going to be unbalanced. You got to run it to your camera as well. XLRs are going to be much better for that just because it's going to be that balanced input and it's going to give you a cleaner quality, right? So you can get that directly out of the soundboard and work with it from there. If you cannot do that, the next best thing would be, and from my own experience, I've used like a wireless microphone kit that's connected to the soundboard, okay? The microphone portion, and then the receiver is connected to my camera, and I've got the audio coming out of the soundboard directly into that wireless microphone, and then that signal is coming into my camera. What this does, it gets you that signal still, right? It's not going to be as balanced and maybe not even as clean as it would be coming out of an XLR. So you need to make sure you listen to it to see how loud it is, because it might peak out because it's just coming in too hot to that little microphone. So you might need to turn it down, right? But the thing that it does is it does sync up your audio directly from the sound system into your camera so you can have a clean audio directly in. Now, the next thing you would need to do or consider, if you can't do that, right? If you don't have a wireless microphone that can connect, then you need to have a good connection to the soundboard to record sound separately, and then have a microphone on your camera to record sound separately to your camera. All right. This is going to be later on synced up, and you'll probably use the audio from your soundboard, just because it's going to be that direct connection where the person holding the microphone is going directly into that soundboard as opposed to directly in your camera. Now, the thing that's going to be different about your camera's audio is it's going to pick up a lot of room noise. Okay. So that means it's going to, the sound is going to sound like it's a lot of space between the person speaking and the camera that's recording them. We typically don't count that as high quality audio, right? Generally speaking. Now, it's not saying that it's not going to be good, but it's not going to be as good as directly connecting to the soundboard. All right. So, by all means possible, get your audio directly from the soundboard. If you can get it directly to an XLR to your camera, great. If you can't, then use a wireless adapter, a wireless microphone from the soundboard directly to your camera. If you can't, fine. Get a recorder. Okay, a separate recorder. You can get some that have XLR ports that you can record directly into, or it can be an input, and put that directly into your from the soundboard into your little recorder, and now you record that and make sure the audio is just not too hot. That's the number one thing. You don't want it to peak out and now your audio is bad. I'd rather my audio be low than be too loud. Okay, because there's a lot of things you can do to massage the audio when it's too low by boosting it up and turning on some noise cancellation and things like that. But if it peaks out and it's too loud, it's very difficult, if at all possible, to recover unless you're recording it in 32-bit float. But a lot of people think that's going to solve the problem with the audio being too loud. And from my experience, that doesn't solve the problem with the audio coming out of the soundboard too loud, because it's still a limitation of what that soundboard is able to put out in terms of if it was hot out the soundboard too loud, in terms of it was peaking out, right? It was too hot on the soundboard. It's not going to be any better going into your system or to your recorder. So you have to make sure your audio is not too loud. And if you can record in 32-bit float, that's great. You can always boost it up a lot cleaner and a lot easier from 32-bit float. So I'd rather it still be lower than loud. All right. And this is just something you'll learn over experience. However, I'm giving it to you for free right now to help you understand some tips that'll make your recording much better for video and audio. All right. So when it comes to ministry and event recording, those are some things that I would say you need to consider. Now, what cameras can you get with that? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what camera you get, as long as it meets those requirements. This day and age, you're going to have a decent camera. Now, what I would say is I wouldn't even try to get brand new cameras to meet these requirements. I would get the camera that meets those requirements and then compare it to the least cost that you can find, at least the least expensive you can find with those requirements met. You might find yourself with an older cinema camera. Those are really decent. They're still used to this day. I've gone to some universities and event venues, and they're using what is it, a Canon? Oh, I can't even remember what it is now, but they're one of their older model DSLR cameras, and they work perfectly fine. They take XLR input, they've got full size HDMI, and they work fine for what you're doing for your ministry. I'm not assuming that you're going to need much higher quality than HD, especially if you're trying to stream it, right? You're going to record, that's great. It'll record in HD. You can stream it in full HD as well. But the quality in those cameras is excellent. And those cameras are probably 15 years old. Okay. Now, if you want to get something newer, you want to get something smaller because they're a little bit bigger, but you want something smaller, that's great. Look for some cameras that meet those requirements. And like I said, you're still going to probably end up with another type of cinema camera, maybe from Sony. But if you want something that is newer and smaller than that, I would recommend Panasonic. They got an EVA 1 camera that's a great cinema camera. I don't know what the inputs, I believe it does take XLR inputs. I could be wrong about that, but I know it has great recording qualities. And the GH5 and the GH6, I know they have the XLR adapter and they don't have a recording limit. Those cameras will be great. The GH4 may be the same way as well. And then your newer Sony cameras, the small FX30, FX3s, those will have that adapter. You can plug in the XLR. They've got a full-size HDMI, but you're not going to have a lot more Sony cameras that meet that requirement unless you look at their camcorder line, right? Camcorder or cinema line. You're going to see some cameras that meet those requirements really well. Not Canon, but Sony's camcorders, from my experience, have much better low light capabilities. Even though they have a smaller sensor, they have much better low light quality than other camcorders on the market. So if you're looking to just meet these requirements, get a good quality camcorder, and it doesn't have to be a brand new one. Like I said, get one that's used. Get one that you can find at a good price, but it meets those requirements, and you'll be on your way to having a great event recording. Okay. Those are the things that stand out to me. There's a lot of other features your cameras will have. They'll have these high bit rates and all that kind of stuff. Those things are great, but when it comes to an event, they're not that necessary. Okay, they're not that necessary at all. That's why an older camera from Canon will do just fine because you're filming an event. You're not shooting up close and trying to have movement with the camera. So stability, those things aren't that important because it's going to likely be on a tripod. You're not going to do a lot of hand holding at a live event. And if you do need to do hand holding, then you do want to have a camera that has some weight to it so that it's not going to be extra jittery and or some type of image stabilization built into it. And even then you want to use it sparingly because often it can cause a warping effect, but you can get good lenses that have image stabilization built in as well. When you start going down cinema cameras and mirrorless cameras, you're going to have to buy some lenses for these. So you got to count that into the cost. And a lot of people forget that when you buy a camera that has a detachable lens, you got to take into account, you got to get the lens. Now, the thing that I didn't talk about, this kind of a bonus feature that you need to consider, is making sure that you plug it up to external power. This to me is a must when it comes to using a camera for an event, because events generally are going to run anywhere from 1 to 4 hours long, right? And so you want to make sure that you can have enough power to support that long of an event without your battery dying on you, right? So that could be a number of different things. I'm not saying that it has to be it can't be plug-in power, or that it can't be a V-mount battery or something like that, but you need to make sure that it can withstand the length of at least 2 hours to record straight through without it giving out. A lot of batteries that are built in don't do that, right? Some of the Sony cameras, the newer ones especially, have really great battery life, right? I still would recommend, even with that great battery life, I would want to have some type of backup battery connected to it that's feeding it through USB-C, or I would just plug it directly into the wall, maybe from the USB-C port, or you need to have some type of dummy battery accessory that you can use to power that camera. Now, my personal preference is having a camera that can support the battery that's built into it, or that came with it, I should say, a manufacturer battery. Aftermarket batteries, they can be good, but they're not as reliable as the ones made usually by the manufacturer. So I would steer away from those for long events if you're relying on the battery, okay? Because that is directly related. The quality of the battery from the manufacturer is going to just last longer, be a better quality from general use. There are going to be some great ones that come out that are aftermarket, even after this video is made, that may match or even exceed or excel those of the manufacturer, but it's not something that is commonplace, all right? Now, going back, I would include the battery. I would insert my battery into my camera, and that battery would literally will serve as a backup process if the power goes out, because I would still have a USB-C connected to the wall directly to my camera, all right, to power it up, or a USB-C power bank, right? A V-mount battery could count as that power bank, or just a power bank that supplies my camera with power. Okay. I currently use a setup that's similar to that for when I shoot events, and even when I just shoot with my camera in general, because it extends the life of my battery probably 5 or 6 fold, right? So I can shoot for upwards of maybe 4 hours with a battery bank plugged in through USB-C to my camera, because it still uses my regular battery, but it also charges it real time and or powers the camera real time as well. And so that extends the battery life quite a bit. And if there's something wrong, for example, if I just have it plugged up with like a phone charger to the wall, to the USB-C port, but I've got this battery built into my camera that I've actually, it's installed a regular battery, not a dummy battery, but a real battery. The power goes out. If that cord, somebody accidentally pulls it out, I'm not without power to my camera. It doesn't shut off because the USB-C was unplugged, because there's a battery in the camera that's still powering it up. And it also comes in handy if you're using a V-mount or a USB power bank or something like that. You can switch those out and kind of what they call hot swap, where you don't stop your recording and it actually still works. All right. Another bonus tip, right? This is a big one if you are using your camera to record. All right. This is major. If you're using your camera to record any type of event, my recommendation is getting a camera that has two card slots. Okay, whatever the card is, I don't care if it's two SD cards, I don't care if it's two CF Express type A or type B cards, but from a professional perspective, the best thing you can do is have redundancy in your recording. Earlier, I talked about recording to your camera and to an SSD onto the switcher or something like that. But it's if you're not using a switcher and you're just recording directly to your camera, it's still good to have that redundancy. So having a camera that has two card slots, a lot of camcorders have that, which is great. So you'll be good there, but not very many mirrorless cameras are going to meet that requirement of having a full-size HDMI, having no recording limit, having dual card slots, having XLR input, right, for audio. Those things are not going to be met by many cameras, but if you can find a camera that meets all those requirements and you're wanting to shoot events, you're well on your way to being efficient with your event recording and not having to worry about a lot of the things that have come with you not having those things, right? I've used cameras that don't meet all those requirements. They don't have full-size HDMI. They had a recording limit and they didn't have dual SD card slots. And I still shot my event, but I always made sure that I used more than one camera to shoot the event. Okay. And that was literally my backup. The second angle was the backup SD card. The second angle was the backup battery. The second angle, and the battery thing was different because I did use a dummy battery directly in, but if the power went out, those cameras are going to die. So there was really no getting around that. And so you want to be mindful of that, because if someone's paying you or you're volunteering, you want to provide a high quality product. You want to provide a high quality video experience for those who are going to be viewing it later on, and those who you report to. Okay. If you've got a client or you're reporting to a ministry, you want to make sure that you're doing the best you can to provide the best quality that you can. And these tips should help you far and above just a good camera review. Because like I said, I don't care what camera you get. However, any camera that you get, if it meets these requirements, you're going to be well on your way to having a quality experience. And it's going to relieve a lot of headaches for you as well. All right. One thing I didn't mention was having backup audio. So as much as it's good to have the XLR audio coming straight from the soundboard, I still would make sure you have backup audio. So another microphone connected to the camera that's getting that room noise, right? We talked about that, but it would just literally be backup maybe on channel 2 or whatever. Some cameras will record 4 channels of audio. So it could be channels 3 and 4 on the microphone on the camera or audio channels 1 and 2 are used for the soundboard. All right. And then when you're editing in post, you can take out the worst one. Okay. If you're streaming it live, then you might want to consider, okay, maybe I turn down the one that's on the camera so I can have the best audio coming from the soundboard directly into my live stream, because that's going to be the best experience. If you're not editing it, especially, that would be something to consider. But hopefully this helps you with your production for your ministry or your events. That's what this is specifically focused towards, and helping you make the best choice when picking the best equipment for you.